Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Kap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 55 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail today in Week 16 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Kap. Nick, this is our Thursday show. We are recording late Tuesday night, so I do want to let you guys know about that in case some information does change. If there's an injury on Wednesday or something crazy happens, we are recording on Tuesday night, but we have all the information that you need to have a successful Week 16, second round of your fantasy football playoffs. Nick is still in, I believe, 3 of his playoffs, 2 or 3. 2. So Nick's in 2, I'm in 2. So we are both very much alive and have a chance at fantasy football championships. Hopefully you guys are the same. And if for some reason we don't answer all of your fantasy-related questions on this show, we have a treat for you, our live show this Sunday, as always, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Nick, a big fantasy football weekend coming up.
Oh, yeah, big time. Hopefully you got through your first week if you were on bye. Hopefully you got those duds out the way and we could get the bounce back for this week. But, yeah, man, usually for most leagues, 2 weeks left of your fantasy football playoffs. Nick and I here, as always, to try and help you get to that glory.
And like we did say, this is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. If you're a first-time listener or viewer, welcome and thank you so much. You can get this show on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and our live show on Sundays. This is Thursday's show, like I already stated. The live show is this Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find the show on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, like any video, and hit that bell icon so you get notifications when we go live. And we're also available on all audio streaming platforms and social media. On our Thursday show, if you haven't heard already, it is our all boom and all bust teams. We'll get into that in a second and what that means. But it is 7 players from me and Nick that we think are going to boom, and then 7 separate players that we think are going to bust in Week 16. So let us start with our all boom teams for Week 16. Here's how the all boom and all bust teams work. Me and Nick will send our teams to our anonymous source, who then cross-references it to make sure that we get 14 different players on each side. That does mean that if me and Nick both select a guy like Mike Evans, one of us will get Mike Evans, the other one will not get Mike Evans. So for the all boom team, it's basically flex players, fringe players, players that you may not start, you may think about starting, but we think you should start because they are going to boom. So you won't see guys on this team like a Bijan Robinson, who do not boom and cost me a week in a league, I should say. You won't see guys like Justin Jefferson. You won't see those guys on the all boom team. So Nick, who is your all boom quarterback? And I do want to preface this with, I know one of Nick's players on both teams. It is his quarterback. My first choice was Jameis Winston. He was going to have a great week. I think he was going to have a great week, but he has gotten benched for DTR, which is a stupid decision by the Cleveland Browns. Me and Nick are not so happy about that.
Nope.
Nick's quarterback ended up being my second choice, but since he had already filled out his team, that's his quarterback. And then I have my third choice will be my all boom. So, Nick, let's talk about your all boom quarterback for Week 16, who I think will also have a spectacular game.
For sure, and it is your QB5 on the year by very much a surprise in Baker Mayfield. Baker has had a phenomenal football season, and he has had an even better fantasy football season. Right now, he has been dominating the bad teams. He's currently averaging 22 points per game against teams that allow top 10 points to the quarterback position. Now he gets the Dallas Cowboys this week, who allow the 5th most points to the QB position. You also factor in Trayvon Diggs out for the year. Mike Evans is absolutely going to cook. I don't know if Nick talks about this play, so I'm sorry if I spoil it, but Jalen McMillan, definitely a sneaky start and somebody that's been playing well. And as long as this offense is clicking, you can expect Baker to cook the Cowboys. This has been a matchup that we've kind of taken advantage of all year. The Cowboys defense has not been very good for the majority of the season. I think this is a great time to keep riding that momentum.
So like I said, my all boom quarterback was my third choice. And I'm going a little bit bold. I think Cooper Rush is going to boom this week. And if you were in a 14-man league, a 16-man league, maybe you're starting Geno, maybe you're starting Caleb, I think Cooper Rush could be a starter for you this week. He's facing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, facing Baker Mayfield, and the Bucs have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 21.2 points per game. A couple weeks ago, I really knocked the Cowboys offense. I said they're not really playable, but they've kind of picked up steam, and so has Cooper Rush. He has 5 consecutive games of double-digit fantasy points, and 3 of those games he has over 15 fantasy points. He's been very reliable. All he has to do is feed CeeDee Lamb, and he's going to have a decent enough game. Again, if this is a deeper league play. I obviously wouldn't play Cooper Rush over guys like, Hurts or Lamar or anything like that. But I mean, there's some fringe players here, fringe quarterbacks. I mean, Sam Darnold did not have a good game last night. I'm sorry to my co-host over there. Bo Nix is the Chargers this week. I wouldn't start Bo Nix against the Chargers this week, as much as this podcast does love Bo Nix. That's a tough matchup. Kyler has a good matchup against the Panthers, so I can't use Kyler. Purdy has a pretty tough matchup. I'm pretty sure. Forget his matchup if I remember this week. Gino's banged up and has a tough matchup against the Vikings. Caleb, Herbert has a tough matchup against the Broncos. I'm just naming off guys here, but I think Cooper Rush is very, very much in play this week, and I would consider him as a starter in a deeper league. Your first running back, who do you have?
I am going with Isaac Guerendo, running back for the 49ers, third string running back for the 49ers. And listen, 49ers and Kyle Shanahan's system moves the ball with the running backs. Guerendo has had 3 games now as a starter, 2 back-to-back weeks, and then he had 1 earlier in the year where Jordan Mason missed a week while CMC was out. 19.2, 26.8, and 11.5 this past week in a game where he got a little dinged up in, but still, once again, performing for your fantasy team. Now you get to go up against the Dolphins, middle of the pack, a little bit on the easier side for running back matchup, but this is a winner-go-home spot for the 49ers. They are coming off long rest. They have played snow games, rain games. Now they get to go to Miami, sunny, beautiful weather for him and that 49ers offense. They get to go up against Mike McDaniel. Not a revenge game, obviously, head coach to head coach, but a team that Shanahan should frankly be very familiar with. Offensively and defensively. I think that this should be a 49ers molly-whopping in the spot, and the game script should call for them to run the ball a ton, and that only benefits your guy, Guerendo.
I'm going to go with James Conner, a guy that Nick spoke about on Tuesday's show, and I'm not sure if Conner can be used for these teams, but I do think he is going to have a phenomenal matchup, and I'm going to stake my flag here that Conner's going to have a top 5 week. Facing the Panthers, who will have the most fantasy points to running backs on the season, a 26.5 average. The Cardinals love to run the ball. And Conner's been pretty good this season. Is your running back 10, and he has 20-plus fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. That should continue. I see a top 5 week coming for James Conner, 20, 25-plus fantasy points. I think he'll have a really good week, especially in PPR leagues. Your second running back, who do you have?
I am going to shoot my shot here. I'm going to go with Craig Reynolds, the RB2 for the Detroit Lions. I think he's a very sneaky waiver wire pickup. I think he's going to get a lot more volume and usage than you think. Jahmyr Gibbs obviously now is the number 1 projected running back every single week for the next 2 weeks because of how much the Lions run the ball, how dominant they are running the ball, the number 1 offensive line in football. I do not think that the Lions are going to give the ball to Jahmyr Gibbs 30 to 40 times per game, which is what this backfield has been averaging. I think those numbers go to Craig Reynolds. Monty and Gibbs, they played against this matchup against the Bears, a team that is awful against the run earlier this year. In that matchup, they combined for 228 total yards, 30 carries, and 7 targets. I think that you're going to see more or less the same. I think obviously Gibbs is the better play, but I do think it's going to be closer to a 60-40 split than it would be a 70-30, 80-20 that you'd really hope for from Gibbs to be a superstar. I think that Craig Reynolds, if you are in a league where you need that deep running back play, if you've had your running backs get dinged up, he is in my opinion, a snipe start. I think you can very much reach down the board, go pick him up, and I think you can play him now to hopefully help you win your fantasy football matchup. It's a very bold take, but one that could age very, very well. And I would at least put him on the roster if you have the depth, because if they do wind up going with both of them, there's always a chance you play him next week if somebody gets injured.
I'm going to go with Ramondre Stevenson, another positive matchup here, facing the Bills, who allow the second most fantasy points to running backs, an average of 24.9 points per game. Stevenson's point total hasn't been great over the last month. However, he has had 69 plus yards in 4 of his last 5 games, so he is getting the volume. The Patriots are just kind of falling behind in games and probably not utilizing him to the best of their ability. Division matchup, what I like about division matchups is they get wonky no matter the division. I like the positive matchup. I think there's an opportunity here to sneak Stevenson in your lineup. If you're worried at running back, like if you have Pacheco and Stevenson this week, I'd rather play Stevenson, for example. So, if you're worried about your starters, if you're struggling to find a second starter and you have Stevenson on your team, I would get him in your lineups. Your first receiver, who do you got?
I'm going with T. Higgins. I know he's had a bad game 2 weeks ago, and a lot of people were pissed off with him. Well, he had a very solid game this past week, and he has been looking good over the course of the entire season outside of that one outlier. He's averaging 17 points per game over the course of the season. He got hurt against the Browns in week 7. He's going up against the Browns this week. And in that game, he scored 18 points. I think he's going to have a very big game. This is a matchup he has taken advantage of. T. Higgins has been great against the division in his career. I definitely am curious how this Bengals offense looks next year when Higgins is definitely out of there, because if they haven't played Chase yet, they're not going to pay Higgins and Chase. And I was hoping that we got Jameis Winston and we got that shootout and we got the 2 quarterbacks throwing haymakers and deep bombs with all their receivers. You don't get that, but I still think T. Higgins is going to have a very, very good day. I think he gets close to that 20 mark and hopefully can break that number and give you a big fantasy league-winning performance.
I think I racked up George Pickens on the All Boom team last week. And apologies, guys. We do these All Boom teams usually on a Wednesday night. We don't really have the practice reports. We're kind of looking at the matchups, and especially an injury like his, I believe it's a hamstring. I think he was close to playing, and so this just happens. Sometimes we'll do an All Boom team, and sometimes the player gets hurt on Friday, and then unfortunately, the take is still there, but unfortunately, nothing we could do about it. But I'm re-racking George Pickens, who I don't think practiced today. I don't know why they were practicing today. Do they have a Saturday game, maybe? No, the NFL can't be doing Saturday games this soon. He doesn't have the Thursday game. There are Saturday games. There's 2 Saturday games.
They do, because
what are they doing?
They're playing. They're playing Saturday because they're doing the Christmas game. So they had to put. I believe it's the Chiefs that play on Saturday, and it's the Steelers, and then those 2 are going to face each other on Wednesday. So they couldn't give them Sunday, Wednesday.
Yeah, but the Texans play on Christmas. The Texans are playing Sunday.
Texans play on Sunday? That's crazy.
The Texans? I'm sorry, I'm wrong. You're correct. Yeah, all 4. Do away with the stupid Christmas games. I want to watch my college football playoff this weekend. We have a 12-team playoff. Get rid of the Saturday games. Give college football this weekend. Oh, my God. That doesn't sit well with me. Anyway. Pickens in practice today on Tuesday. Let's hope he practices this week, because if he does, he's going to have a great game for you on Saturday, and you need him, and so does Russell Wilson. The Ravens have allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 32.4 per game. Russell Wilson stats have gone up with George Pickens. George Pickens has double-digit fantasy points in 5 out of 6 games with Russell Wilson. He has 16-plus fantasy points in 4 of those 5 said games. And when he faced Baltimore in Week 11, he had 16.9 fantasy points. Even if he's dinged up, as long as he's out on the field, George Pickens should be on your fantasy lineup, and he should have another good game in a very, very competitive game. It should be for the AFC North, which is up for grabs. The Steelers will face the Ravens, and then they face the Chiefs. So the Ravens still have a chance to win this division. The Steelers have not locked it up. Should be a very, very competitive game. I'm locked all in on George Pickens. And the Ravens passing defense has been historically bad, by the way. So if Pickens plays, Russell Wilson's in play as well.
Real quick, just because we briefly mentioned it for 2 seconds, I just got a notification. Patrick Mahomes is practicing, and the odds have flipped. I have never seen, and as somebody personally, this is a true story, people. I've had 17 ankle sprains in my life.
Yes.
I've never seen someone recover so quickly from an ankle sprain than Patrick Mahomes. I feel like
because this is going to be him on Saturday. He's going to be going, ref.
Yeah.
Ref. It's one of his go-tos.
I feel like he gets
he's going to do the I'm going to see it on Saturday, I promise you. And look, Pat's great. He's a great talent, but he's the quickest quarterback to right when throws to there you go, ref. Anyway, Nick's going to have some great content for the thumbnail on this episode.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I was literally thinking that.
Enjoy it. All right. Second wide receiver for you.
I am going with Khalil Shakir. He has been on fire since week 7. He's got 7+ targets in every single one of those games. He scored 10 plus in all those games except the 49ers where he got hurt and then they pulled him early in that snow game. The last 2 games, both dome games, and I know I saw this online. Josh Allen in the dome is averaging I guess it's the Rams and the Lions the last 2 weeks, but 48 and 42 points in each of those games. Very phenomenal. But Khalil Shakir in both those games, 22 and 16, as Josh Allen pushes on this MVP campaign. I think Shakir is going to see a ton of workload and primary workload. I think he is the clear wide receiver 1 over here on this team. For Josh Allen going up against the New England Patriots, a team that they have not seen this year, which is crazy. Division team. They're going to play this week, and then in the final week of the season, first time that team has to deal with this Buffalo Bills offense. I think they're going to look really, really good as they have all year, carry that momentum, and Khalil Shakir once again gets over that double-digit mark, but I think it's going to be closer to that 20 mark. I think he's going to easily find the end zone in this one.
I have Jaden Reed, another guy, and again, I've said this Packers offense is inconsistent. Jacobs had a great game on Sunday night in the first quarter, and then disappeared, and then we didn't really see the receivers do too much. But Jaden Reed is a very positive matchup on Monday night if you need a Monday night miracle. The Saints allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 30.3 per game. Jaden Reed has double-digit points in each game that he's had 6+ targets with Jordan Love. That's done it 6 times this season. So I think if he gets the target share, he'll have a touchdown and he'll have a very, very good game. But again, like I always say about the Packers offense, you're spinning a wheel and you don't know who you're going to get. It's been the Jacob show for the past month or so, but in terms of the receivers, you really don't know who you're going to get. But I do think Reed will have a good game. No Lattimore, no real good corners over there. Terry McLaurin just had a day, like 2 touchdowns and 100 yards. I think Jaden Reed should be in your lineups this week. Your tight end, who do you have?
I'm going with Brenton Strange, a guy you picked up off of your waiver wires, hopefully on Tuesday. The Jags, they are bad at running back. They are bad at quarterback, and Mac Jones loves the tight end position. We know the game script is always going to be good with this team because they're always going to be playing from behind. Last week, Strange's first game, he completely took over the Engram role. 11 catches on 12 targets, 73 yards, no touchdown. I think he's going to get maybe not 12 targets, but I think he's going to be in that 8+ mark, that 7+ mark, which you really love to see from your tight end position. I think he offers a very safe floor, and I think the upside is there when a guy can get 12 targets at the tight end position. I don't know if he will, but you do love to see that from the first real game as a starter in this lineup. It's definitely something good and something to note, and something that I think you should take advantage of in a very good matchup against the Raiders, who are one of the worst teams against the tight end position.
I'm going to go with David Njoku because I love playing the matchups. I told you guys to play Chiggy last week, and he scored 13.9 fantasy points against the Bengals, and the Bengals have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends, an average of 13.8 per season. Njoku has 4 15+ games. Now, I am a little bit concerned about this take because those were with our guy Jameis Winston, who throws the ball a lot. So I'm hoping DTR either throws a lot to Njoku or has a very bad first half, and they put our guy Jabo in. I was very, very confident in this take with Winston in. Now I'm not sure as much, but it is still a very, very positive matchup. The Bengals defense is bad against quarterbacks, tight ends, and receivers, but mostly quarterbacks and tight ends. So I would keep him locked in your lineup this week in a position that is very, very thin. Your flex play, who do you have?
I'm going with Marvin Harrison Jr., the rookie receiver. He has been on a pretty good touchdown season considering his minimal workload so far. He's got 7 touchdowns in his 14, 15 games, whatever he's played this year. Very, very solid for a rookie performance. But what I love to see from him is the target share improving. They had the bye week 4 weeks ago. In these last 4 weeks, he is averaging 8 targets per game. Prior to that bye, he only had 2 games the entire season with over 8 targets. Now it is not really translated to fantasy points, but the Carolina Panthers defense, not great. They are actually decent against the wide receiver position, but they do not generate a pass rush. I do not think that they're going to play very well against Kyler Murray, one of the only mobile quarterbacks that they have seen. They've played your guys like Cooper Rush. You look at that division, Baker, not overly mobile. Kirk Cousins, definitely not mobile. Derek Carr, not very mobile. I think Kyler Murray is going to be a little bit more of a shock to the system to them. And I think he's going to have plenty of time. And Marvin Harrison has thrived when Kyler Murray has been able to generate time for himself. I think he has a very good game here. And I know a lot of people probably want to bench him, and he is probably a flex-worthy play. Definitely did disappoint on his ADP, but I think here's a good week for him to deliver for your fantasy team.
I'm going with Jacoby Myers, who may have saved some of your fantasy seasons on Monday night. Didn't have a great game, but had enough. I know personally he saved a couple people's seasons. Facing the Jaguars, who will have the third most fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of 32 points per game. And Myers has been pretty good. He has double digits in 6 of his last 7 and 15 plus in 4 of them. So he's been reliable. I think he could boom this week. I think he's a good flex play. There's a couple other flex players that have disappointed. Guys like Quentin Johnson and Tank Dell both have tough matchups this week. Those are guys that play Myers over. So I would definitely consider him for your lineups and play him if needed. All right, moving on now to the old bust team. Unlike the old boom team, every player is available to bust. I did put Jefferson on there last week, and I did say temper your expectations, and he did have a good game. I did have him on the old bust team, and he busted against the Bears.
Wish he found the end zone that second time or that third time. But
would have been nice for my co-host, correct. But anyway, point being, stars are eligible for the old bust team, and we have successfully busted a couple stars this season. Jamar Chase, Jefferson once, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry. So we actually have put some successful busts on the team. So, Nick, who is your all bust quarterback for week 16?
Well, you said stars, and why not start with a superstar, your QB1 on the year, Lamar Jackson. I think that he is going to be a terrible bust this week going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, his biggest kryptonite in his NFL career. His worst game of the year earlier this season came against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This was actually a crazy stat. Nick, what would you guess is Lamar's worst game of the season?
Which week or which opponent?
Well, it's Pittsburgh, but what do you think he scored in that game? Roughly.
12.
Almost 16, 15.88. Incredibly high floor for a quarterback, but I think he's going to be around that threshold, if not lower. It's the only game this year where he finished outside the top 12, which is nuts. And he's only had one game in his career with more than 17 points against this team. So this has not been a good matchup for him historically. I'm definitely tempering the expectations. I know Lamar has that tendency to give you that 35, 40-point game, and you're just like, oh, that's why you draft him where he goes, which is 103, 104, or third, fourth, fifth quarterback off the board for the last few years. But I think this is the worst matchup that he gets every single year. This and Kansas City have been the two that he's always struggled with. And I think he's really going to bite you this week. And I don't know if you can bench him because it's almost impossible to say bench the number one at their position. But I do not think that he is going to deliver over the top. So I say temper expectations, because if you have a debatable play, if you have one of those guys who are like safe floor, low ceiling, or I go all in on this guy who can win me the week, I think that's the switch that you need to make for your lineup, because I do not think Lamar is going to carry you to that win like you might expect him to.
I think Jaden Daniels might be benchable this week. Facing the Eagles, who allow the third fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 14.7. The last time Daniels played the Eagles, he only had 14.4 points in week 11. That's his fourth fewest total on the season. One of those totals was the game that he got hurt. So really his third lowest total in the season in a game that he played the entirety of. And he's regressed a tiny, tiny bit. He's still very, very good. He's regressed a tiny, tiny bit lately. I think if you have a better option, Daniels is benchable. But that's only if you do have a better option in a league where you're a little bit deep in the quarterback position. Running back one, who do you have?
I'm going with Nick's guy, Brian Robinson Jr. from the same exact game. The Eagles, one of the elite teams against the running back. Nick talked about Jaden had 14. So did Brian Robinson. But he did find the end zone in that game, something Brian Robinson has not done much of this year, and something the Eagles have not allowed a lot of this year. They have been really good against running backs, one of the top 5 teams in football. I do not think he finds the end zone. I think he matches the rest of his stat line, which was 15 carries, 50 to 60 yards, maybe a catch or two, and that is just not good enough for fantasy football champion or playoff week.
My first all-bust running back is a guy that I've been very, very high on throughout the entirety of the season in the preseason, even though I don't have him anywhere, is Mr. Joe Mixon. It's because of the matchup. Facing the Kansas City Chiefs, who allow the fewest fantasy points to running backs, an average of 16.1. Basically, every star running back they've faced, they've held to a season low. And as for Mixon, he had under 11 in 2 of his last 3 games. So the Texans kind of need to run their offense through him. but they haven't been able to do that effectively over the last 3 weeks for the most part. So going up against a really tough Chiefs defense, we know Mahomes is banged up. I think the Chiefs will probably attempt to run the ball. They're not doing it successfully. They're going to want to chew the clock, play defense, and this should be a pretty low-scoring game. So if Mixon isn't in the end zone once or twice, it could be a lower day. And you can't bench him. He's been great on the season. I'm not telling you to bench him. This is one of those temper your expectations. And I do say that on the all-bust team, sometimes it's a temper expectation. Sometimes it's a put him on the bench. Running back 2, who do you have?
Najee Harris, who has lived in the all-bust team, I feel like, almost the entire season, and it's because he's had a very tough schedule, but now he also gets a tough matchup in the Baltimore Ravens. Najee hasn't been good as he has been, or hasn't been as good as I think a lot of people have said the last few weeks. He's looked a lot better with Russ at quarterback. He still gets passes, but for a guy that has the 6th most carries in football, he is the RB21. It's because he does not get in the end zone, and he does not get enough workload or nearly enough workload in the passing game to be consistent enough for your fantasy team, and clearly he's a very inefficient runner. He only has one top 15 finish since week 8. I'm not going to expect him to win you your playoff game. Maybe he gives you that safe floor you want, but I do not. I think when you're in the playoffs, I feel like you really need to take those big swings and those big risks. I feel like the people that pivot are the people that win the fantasy football championship. You do not rely on that guy that's been fine for your team. Eventually it bites you, and I think Najee is going to be one of those guys this week.
I'm going to go with Isaiah Pacheco, and I will state that this is one that should be on your bench. He's been bad. He's been very bad. Pacheco has not cracked double-digit fantasy points since returning from injury. He's been splitting carries with Kareem Hunt. The Chiefs do all this circus nonsense within the red zone, especially within the 5, the shuffles, little dumps, the jet screens. And they're facing the Texans defense, to allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs, an average of 16.1. This is a recipe for disaster, and this is a fantasy football season ending play if you're putting Pacheco in your lineups. Your first receiver.
I'm going with Zay Flowers. I've talked a lot about this game already. I'm doubting Lamar, and again, I'm going to doubt Zay Flowers, but this is for a little bit of a different reason. Zay has been, or at the start of the year, through the first 9 games, was really a boom or a bust guy. He was Tyler Lockett. He was 18 plus points, or he was like 5 and under. He was really that big of a floor and a ceiling gap. He has stabilized, which is fine, but it doesn't win you fantasy football playoff games. He has not scored over 12 points since week 10. They've all literally been between 10 and 11.9. There's 1 or 2 outliers in there under, but just barely. I don't think he's going to crack that 18, which he has done in 5 games prior to week 10, something that was very, very good for him. I don't think he's going to explode. I think it's the same issue as Najee. He's fine. He will give me the floor. He will give me the 10 points, but I don't want 10 points. I want a guy that will go get me 5 or will go get me 20. I'd rather take the risk on a guy like that. And I think that there's other guys there's honestly some guys on the waivers like Jalen McMillan, who I would much rather play and take the risk on in a better matchup than I would with Zay Flowers going up against the Steelers.
My first bust here is Mr. Deebo Samuel, and another one I would probably consider putting on the bench. Has also been terrible. He has not cracked double-digit fantasy points since week 10. We are now going into week 16. Has a tough matchup against the Dolphins, who allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 23.8. I think Deebo's time with San Francisco might be done during this offseason. He just looks slow. He looks out of it. His body language is bad. I'd be very scared playing Deebo this week if I had him in my lineup. And I actually do have him in a lineup right now, and I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to tinker in there because I don't love the options.
I have him too, and I'm going to bench him as well. So
who are you benching him for, though?
I have Juwan Jennings as my pivot, so I'd rather take the shot on him at this point than I would Deebo.
Okay, I have Jennings and Deebo, so I don't have a pivot there with Juwan Jennings. Your second wide receiver, who do you have?
I have Terry McLaurin. I went very star heavy on this all bust team. A lot of name value here. And Terry, he is been great. He's kind of proved me wrong this season. I thought way too many people valued him as a wide receiver. I did not think he was as good as he has played. But he's proved me wrong. But I'm going to doubt him against the Eagles. Eagles defense has been elite. I think they've been one of the 2 or 3 best defenses in football throughout from week 1 to now. And they're definitely on one of the hotter defenses at the moment. When they faced earlier this year, Terry McLaurin did have his worst game of the year. I believe he had 1 catch for 10 yards or something like that. It was a really poor performance. Jaden Daniels is going to need to be a superhero. And Nick already talked about him on the all-bust team, so I won't get too much into it. But I think the only way Jaden Daniels really can thrive against this defense is creating plays for himself. I think he's going to have to roll out of the pocket. I think he's going to have to run a lot. I think that's where he can give you the floor, but that does not translate to Terry McLaurin's numbers. So I think he's going to need touchdowns and the big touchdowns to kind of open up the game, because I don't think he's going to get those 8+ targets. He did not get that the last time they played. I'm a big fan of history repeats itself, especially in these division matchups. When you saw it once, you can expect it to happen again. Similar game plan, similar strategies, and I think that Terry will struggle heavily in this game. And I think if you are playing him, because you cannot bench him, you're really preying on him getting that 60, 70-yard touchdown. He's done it a few times this season, so there's no reason he can't. But this is not the matchup that you really want for a guy like that in your lineup.
I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp here, who had a goose egg last week. And if you got through your matchup with Cooper Kupp, good for you. But now he has another tough matchup against the Knicks Jets. They allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 24.3. Nick, I'm pretty sure both of your corners will be healthy this week. I think Sauce played this past weekend. So I don't know who's going to cover Kupp, but both Sauce and DJ Reed have been great corners for the past 2-3 years. So again, not a guy you can bench unless you're really worried about him, but another temper expectations.
I actually almost put Cooper Kupp on the all boom team, just so you know.
Okay.
I don't want to dispute you too much for
No, that's okay.
But Kupp in the slot receivers have dominated the Jets. DJ Reed was out this past week, which was a concern. We just watched the Jags offense with Mac Jones cook them. Since Salah's been fired, the Jets have allowed the 6th most points to the wide receiver position. It was really dominating early on.
All right.
At least the last 6-7 weeks, it's really been bad. So Cooper Kupp can definitely struggle. Don't get me wrong. But the Jets matchup, if you're on sleeper, it's in big bold red. Do not play against the Jets. But if you go to like some of the like fantasy footballers who will filter it by week, like they have been horrible, and that's my team. So
okay, all right.
It is what it is.
Tight end, who do you have?
I'm going with the Laporta body. And listen, Sam Laporta earlier this year when he went up in this matchup in week 13, he had 3 catches for 6 yards, and he found the end zone twice. Ridiculous stat line from Sam Laporta. I think that Laporta, if that happened to me, if I were the head coach of the team, and we played against the team in my division, and they had 1 player catch 2 touchdowns in the red zone, and he dropped a 3rd that would have been a touchdown in this game. That would be the only thing I care about guarding in the red zone. I would not care with David Montgomery now out. You know it's going to be Gibbs most likely getting the goal line work. I would have all my focus on Sam Laporta, and I do not think that he can make up the yardage the other way. Like I said, 3 catches, 6 yards in this game. Throughout the course of the year, he only has 2 games over 55 yards, only 3 games over 5 catches. So let's say you put both of those together, that's 10.5. That's still a bust for the first tight end drafted in your fantasy football leagues.
I'm going with Mr. Jonnu Smith. This is another temper expectations. This is the temper expectations bust team here. 49ers are really tough against tight ends. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points, 2 tight ends, an average of only 6.8 per season, with the Dolphins having per game. With the Dolphins having so many weapons on offense, I could just see them using a lot of HN, a lot of Tyreek Hill, a lot of Waddle if he does end up playing. And maybe John who gets phased out if Fred Warner is on top of him, who's been one of the best coverage linebackers, in the past couple of years. Your flex play, who do you have?
All right, I went for another superstar, A.J. Brown. I think last week was a huge outlier compared to what we saw. We knew he needed that big redemption game. Jalen Hurts and them were chatting, saying, we can win by the passing game. We can show you. And then they showed you. Listen, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, both top 10 receivers last week. Yeah, that's not going to happen in my opinion. I think it's coast to the playoffs. You need a win against Washington, and I think they're going to get it. If anything, they're going to push for that Saquon Barkley MVP. I think it's out of reach now based off how Josh Allen has played, but I do think that they've kind of rotated who the guy is, and it's Saquon Barkley's turn after they took his a little bit away last week. I think you're obviously playing A.J. Brown, but I am tempering the expectations. He came off his best game of the season. I am not expecting him. Like if you were prop better, like I would not be betting the overs on A.J. Brown this week. I feel like everything is going to be a little inflated based off last week.
I'm going with Ladd McConkey on Thursday Night Football facing the Broncos and Patrick Surtain, who allowed the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 23.8. In the one game he has played against the Broncos, he only had 8.3 in week 6. I know that was a while ago, and he's caught a little bit of fire with Herbert. If I am the Broncos defense, I'm looking to take out McConkey because Quentin Johnston, 50-50 if he's going to have brick hands or not. So I think McConkey could get phased out of this week. All right, that is our final show heading into week 16. Hopefully we answered a majority of your fantasy football questions. We give you 14 boom players and 14 bust players. We can't talk about everybody, so we did not talk about your players. If you still have really tough lineup decisions, which I'm sure you do, join our week 16 live show, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, so we can answer all of your fantasy football questions. If you watch this show and you enjoyed it on YouTube, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you get notifications every time we go live or post a new video. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform, thank you for doing that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating and a review. We would appreciate that as well. If you have any other fantasy football questions, Twitter is Primetime FFPod, Instagram is Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for your support. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys on Sunday.